What if the Queen's final wish wasn't unity, but exile? That question has haunted the walls of Buckingham Palace for months now. But no one expected the answer to be whispered during a late-night meeting, behind closed doors, between two of the monarchy's most stoic figures, King Charles III and his unrelenting sister, Princess Anne. The mood was frigid. The fire in the drawing room barely cracked the silence. And then, she said it. We can't keep this hidden any longer. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Hidden from whom? The public? Parliament? Or perhaps the family itself? Because what was brewing inside that room wasn't just royal frustration. It was a strategy, a reckoning, a plan that could, for the first time in modern British history, see a reigning monarch actively ask Parliament to strip his own son and daughter-in-law of every remaining title, privilege, and royal association. No royal firm had ever dared thread that needle before. Not even during the chaos of Edward VIII's abdication. Not even when Diana's titles were disputed. But now, everything was different. And we're about to show you why. You see, what the public was fed, carefully orchestrated PR, curated palace statements, and Sussex media leaks, was only a sliver of the real story. Behind the scenes, this wasn't just about titles. This was about control, about legacy, about the quiet civil war that had slowly engulfed the House of Windsor since Harry and Meghan's departure. And it was about to explode. Because someone inside the palace had had enough. Princess Anne, often dubbed the hardest-working royal, had held her tongue through Oprah, through the Netflix series, through Spare, through lawsuits, birthday snubs, paparazzi stage car chases, and thinly veiled jabs aimed at the royal institution she dedicated her life to. She stayed silent. Until now. But before we unravel her motives, the secret meetings, and the shocking motions soon to hit Parliament, let's set the stage. Because this isn't just a royal drama. This is a constitutional earthquake. And when the crown turns on its own, nothing will ever be the same again. Let's start where it all began. The Queen's funeral. The moment the family reunited, under cameras, under tension, under the weight of history. It was the first time in years that Harry and Meghan were physically present with the family, forced into protocol, forced into silence, forced to walk behind the Queen's coffin with the very institution they had publicly lambasted. That visual, cold, formal, and dripping with unease, told the world everything without a single word spoken. But what most didn't see was what happened afterward. According to multiple palace insiders, Princess Anne was livid. Not just because of the couple's behavior during the funeral period, whispers of side conversations with American media, subtle wardrobe violations, a carefully timed leak about Meghan's absence from Balmoral. No, Anne's fury was more profound. It was generational. She believed the monarchy was reaching its breaking point, not because of public cynicism or outdated traditions, but because two people had turned their royal connection into a global brand of controversy. And worse, they were still using the titles gifted by the crown to legitimize that brand. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, for words that still carried power, influence, recognition, a royal seal of endorsement, despite their continued attacks on the very system those titles represent. And for Anne, who never once demanded a title for her own children, it was an insult. She began making quiet moves, reaching out to aides, requesting legal precedent files, even consulting with royal historians about the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, last used during World War I to remove honors from German Allied royals. It was obscure, antiquated, but it existed, and it could, potentially, be modernized, weaponized, with the help of Parliament. This wasn't a tabloid feud. This was legislative chess. King Charles, meanwhile, was more conflicted. He still viewed Harry through a father's lens. Torn between emotion and duty, Charles had hoped, perhaps naively, that time would heal the rift. But each public jab, each monetized memoir chapter, each podcast jab against royal racism only twisted the knife deeper. And then came Dubai, the final straw. Meghan's reported secret meetings in Dubai, allegedly connected to media deals, private fundraising, and commercial engagements, exploded behind palace walls. Rumors swirled that she had presented herself with an air of royal endorsement, subtly hinting at her duchess status during high-profile encounters. Whether or not she officially did so was irrelevant. The optics were devastating. Princess and reportedly confronted Charles days after the news broke. The quote, "This is your legacy. You either preserve it now, or you let it rot." The meeting was immediate. Sandringham. Late at night. Only a skeleton staff nearby. And it's there, behind drawn curtains and guarded doors, that Charles finally asked the question that would change everything. What would it take? And already had the answer. A formal push, led not by the palace, but through Parliament. A motion that would not only strip the Sussexes of their HRH titles, which they technically agreed not to use but still retain, but also legally remove their duchy, and with it, all royal privileges that came with their peerage. The danger? Doing so would require navigating constitutional minefields. It would set precedent. It would raise questions about whether hereditary titles should exist at all. It could reawaken Republican debates. And yet, and didn't flinch, because to her, the bigger danger was doing nothing. So how does a monarch approach Parliament with a request this delicate, this loaded, this unprecedented? Quietly. Sources claim that within weeks, Charles had discreet conversations with senior aides in government. Not to demand legislation, but to explore the sentiment. A coded way of testing waters without committing. What he found was unexpected. There was support. A growing number of MPs, especially from conservative backbenchers and some labor traditionalists, believed it was time to address the Sussex problem. They feared further damage to the monarchy's reputation. They resented the international humiliation after Spare. They were furious that titles bestowed by the British Crown were being used for Netflix deals, Spotify documentaries, and American talk show appearances. One MP reportedly told a palace liaison, "They want the perks without the responsibility. Strip them." Suddenly, a political path began to form. And then, the memo appeared. A classified document, allegedly circulated among select senior government officials, outlining a proposed framework for title removal under a modernized Titles Deprivation Act. The language was cautious. The implications? Explosive. Because buried within was a clause few anticipated, a reclassification of status, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for their children. Yes, Archie and Lilibet. The wording hinted at removing their eligibility for any future royal privileges, effectively severing their line from the monarchy entirely. It was brutal, it was bold, and it was already being discussed in government circles. By the time this story leaked, just a whisper of it, the media frenzy began. Palace spokespeople scrambled. Sussex reps issued vague denials. But the narrative had already escaped, and all eyes turned to one woman, Princess Anne. Would she confirm the whispers? Would she double down? Her answer? An unscripted, rare interview, captured by cameras during a military event in Scotland. When asked about recent royal strains, and didn't blink. Her words? "There comes a time when silence is mistaken for weakness. I don't believe in either." It was the loudest silence break in royal history, and it shook the monarchy to its core. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if everything we thought we knew about royal unity was a lie? Because deep inside Sandringham House, behind centuries-old oak doors, and under the flickering haze of antique chandeliers, a decision was made that could sever a family forever. The press was silent. The courtiers kept it quiet. But something undeniable happened that night. Princess and King Charles came to an agreement that could finally destroy whatever remained of Harry and Meghan's royal connection. Not officially, not publicly, not yet, but it was coming. And it all began with one of the most uncomfortable reunions in recent royal memory. The aftermath of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, a time when grief should have united. Instead, it divided deeper than ever before. Charles was barely days into his reign, already carrying the weight of the crown and the expectations of an entire nation. The transition from heir to monarch is supposed to be symbolic, graceful, reverent, but his was anything but. Instead, Charles found himself juggling a constitutional firestorm, a media circus, and the ever-widening chasm between the royal family and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. So what do you do when your son, once the spare, now the source of a global publicity war, is openly criticizing the institution you've just inherited? What do you do when every move you make is under the scrutiny of a media landscape hungry for cracks? If you're Charles, you turn to the one person who never flinched. Anne. The Princess Royal has always been seen as the monarchy's backbone, the one royal who doesn't seek attention, who doesn't trade in emotion, and who treats royal duty like a military mission. For decades, she kept the family's internal affairs exactly that, internal, but even and had a breaking point. According to an insider with knowledge of the palace dynamics, the Queen's funeral wasn't just the closing of an era, it was a turning point. And watched Harry walk behind the Queen's coffin in ceremonial dress, stripped of his military titles, head bowed, eyes distant. And something shifted. It wasn't just sorrow. It was resignation, disappointment, resolve. Behind closed doors, and reportedly told Charles, "We've been quiet long enough. They're not coming back, and we need to stop pretending they are." This wasn't rage. This was strategy. That statement, calm, clinical, final, is believed to have set the wheels in motion for the Sandringham meeting that followed weeks later. A meeting neither the public nor most of the royal household knew was even happening. No press, no announcement, just two siblings alone with the crown. So why Sandringham? Unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, Sandringham has always been a deeply private royal retreat, the place monarchs go when they want discretion, not ceremony. It's where Queen Elizabeth would spend Christmas, where Prince Philip would walk the grounds in solitude. And now, it's where Charles and Anne would craft the most radical internal policy shift since the Megxit Agreement. Sources claim the meeting was short, under 2 hours, but intense. At first, Charles hesitated. After all, Harry was still his son. Stripping him of titles, even if symbolic, could shatter any remaining chance of reconciliation. But Anne didn't waver. She brought precedent. She brought public sentiment. She brought the polls. Because what many forget is that while the Sussexes maintain massive support abroad, particularly in the US, their approval ratings in the UK have cratered. Multiple surveys in the months after Spare and the Netflix docuseries showed more than 60% of Britons believe Harry and Meghan should voluntarily relinquish their titles if they continue to criticize the monarchy from abroad. And knew this. And she didn't come to Sandringham empty-handed. One insider claimed she brought with her a prepared briefing, confidential notes on royal precedents dating back to 1917, with a particular focus on the Titles Deprivation Act. She had highlighted key clauses, made annotations, even marked suggested areas for modernization. Charles was reportedly stunned by how far along Anne already was. But here's where the contradiction kicks in. King Charles, known for his deliberate pacing and preference for consensus, suddenly faced a choice that would split both the public and his family. Should he act like a father or a monarch? The moment he leaned toward the latter, the pact was made. Eyewitness staff members say Anne left Sandringham that night without her usual security escort. A car was waiting. She was stone-faced, silent. But moments before the door closed, she allegedly turned to an aide and said something unforgettable. "It's done." But what exactly had been agreed to? While the royal household refused to comment on the speculation, multiple leaks have pointed to a verbal agreement between Charles and Anne to pursue formal review of the Sussexes' titles. Not through an internal edict, but by engaging the UK Parliament. It's a detail that matters more than most realize. Because while the monarch has the constitutional power to issue letters patent, the legal instruments that grant or amend royal titles, using Parliament gives the move democratic weight. It also provides insulation. If backlash arises, it won't rest solely on the monarch. It becomes a legislative choice, a reflection of the public will. But here's the twist. By involving Parliament, Charles also opens the door to greater scrutiny from political parties, from constitutional experts, and from a public increasingly suspicious of royal influence. It's a gamble, one Anne was more than willing to take. Because according to a senior royal aide, Anne warned Charles of an even greater threat, stagnation. She told him, "If you let this drag, it will destroy your reign before it begins." And that's when Charles, weary, wounded, but resolved, reportedly made his only condition. It has to be clean. No personal attacks. No revenge. Just the crown, preserving itself. From that point forward, the machine quietly roared to life. Private messages were exchanged with select members of the House of Lords. Legal advisors were brought in under confidentiality clauses. And Anne, She returned to her royal duties as if nothing had happened, smiling, waving, opening hospitals, attending military events. The picture of professionalism. But behind the calm, a storm was gathering. And it didn't take long for the first ripples to reach Meghan and Harry. Unconfirmed reports out of Montecito suggest their team was caught off guard. Whispers of title talk in Parliament triggered an immediate flurry of calls to legal consultants, PR handlers, and political contacts. One source claimed Meghan was furious, not just at the proposal itself, but at the betrayal. She believed Charles had made peace with their distance, that the Oprah interview was ancient history, that Spare was behind them. But what she didn't realize, the Sandringham Pact had changed everything. And in that moment, the Sussexes realized something chilling. This wasn't going to be a quiet erasure. This was going to be a public reckoning. And it had already begun. She kept quiet through Oprah. She bit her tongue through Spare. She endured Netflix documentaries, tell-all interviews, and global media speculation. But Dubai? That was the line. What exactly happened in Dubai remains murky. There were rumors of high-profile meetings, private events, and lucrative deals quietly cemented behind velvet ropes and hotel ballroom doors. Meghan reportedly met influential figures, flaunting her status as a duchess. Even as Buckingham Palace tried to quietly distance itself from her activities. The optics were poisonous. A royal title being used as a business card, a ticket into power circles, and a justification for influence abroad. For Princess Anne, this was unforgivable. Anne's breaking point, insiders say, was fueled not just by the Dubai engagements themselves, but by what they represented, the Sussexes operating in a space entirely free from accountability. While Anne and Charles were navigating a sea of constitutional obligations, media scrutiny, and internal palace tension, Harry and Meghan seemed untethered, wielding their royal connection as a brand. One senior aide claimed and was furious in a way that startled even Charles. She allegedly told him, during a private consultation in Windsor, "I have tolerated this for too long. They've crossed lines that cannot be ignored. If we do not act now, there may never be a chance." Her language was stark, deliberate. She was not speaking of personal hurt, although the familial betrayals cut deep. She was speaking of institutional preservation, of the monarchy itself. The Dubai meetings crystallized a truth and had long suspected. The Sussexes' connection to the crown was now a liability, not an asset. And if she and Charles did not intervene, the damage could be irreversible. This intervention, however, was not to be a public spectacle. Anne's approach has always been strategic. She does not seek applause. She does not court headlines. She plans, she executes, and she observes. It was in this vein that she presented Charles with her final straw argument. They must pursue a formal stripping of all remaining titles, privileges, and royal designations. Not out of vengeance, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The meeting reportedly included a comprehensive review of precedents, possible legal strategies, and the potential fallout, and had already consulted constitutional scholars, Privy Council members, and legal advisors. She had detailed briefings prepared, outlining the process and potential consequences. Every angle had been considered, every risk weighed. Charles listened, initially hesitant, balancing his paternal instincts against the stark logic of Anne's reasoning. The emotional tension in the room, according to insiders, was palpable. Charles, torn between duty and love, was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. His son's actions, combined with Meghan's influence and public campaigns, were eroding public trust in the monarchy. If the family did not act decisively, the institution could face irreparable harm. Anne's position was uncompromising: act decisively, or allow the monarchy's credibility to diminish permanently. And reportedly reminded Charles of the monarchy's history, moments when tough decisions were required, moments when family loyalty had to be subordinated to duty. From Edward VIII's abdication crisis to the political interventions surrounding Princess Margaret's personal life, Anne's argument was clear: the crown's preservation must supersede familial affection. It was the hard truth he had known intellectually but had struggled to confront emotionally. This discussion reportedly also touched on timing and advocated for immediate action, emphasizing that any delay would provide Harry and Meghan opportunities to further leverage their royal connection. She insisted that Parliament be approached discreetly, not with public fanfare, but with carefully controlled briefings to select leaders. By framing the intervention as a constitutional and administrative necessity rather than a personal vendetta, and believed the Crown could act without creating a scandal that might fracture public support. But there was more than just strategy at stake. Anne's personal history with Harry and Meghan colored her resolve. She remembered the boy Harry once was, spirited, curious, and loyal to the Crown. That loyalty, she now believed, had been squandered. Meghan's influence, she argued, had exacerbated Harry's estrangement, turning what could have been a manageable rift into a global spectacle. Every interview, every public statement, every media appearance had chipped away at the monarchy's image. And Dubai was the culmination, the moment Anne could no longer ignore. Charles, for his part, was reportedly conflicted. He understood the necessity of Anne's argument. He recognized the strategic advantages of acting decisively. Yet, as a father, he was acutely aware of the personal implications, the strain this would place on his relationship with his son, the inevitable media backlash, and the public perception of family conflict. It was a delicate balance, requiring both legal precision and emotional restraint. Anne's insistence on discretion and procedural integrity reportedly swayed him. By the end of the meeting, Charles and Anne reached a tentative agreement. Parliament would be quietly briefed, legal frameworks would be reviewed, and a plan would be put in place to formally strip Harry and Meghan of all royal titles and privileges. The decision would not be announced immediately, allowing the palace to prepare for the inevitable fallout and to manage public perception strategically. This moment, according to sources, marked a turning point in the monarchy's approach to the Sussexes. For Anne, it was an assertion of institutional authority, a demonstration that the Crown would not be undermined by external influence or internal dissent. For Charles, it was an acknowledgement that sometimes duty must take precedence over personal loyalty, even when the stakes are profoundly emotional. But the implications of this agreement were not limited to titles alone. The plan reportedly included provisions affecting the Sussexes' children, potential adjustments to ceremonial roles, and long-term considerations for their place within the royal hierarchy. Every detail was being considered, every eventuality accounted for, in a manner designed to preserve the monarchy's integrity while minimizing the risk of scandal. As the meeting concluded, Anne reportedly left with a quiet confidence, her demeanor calm but resolute. Charles, meanwhile, returned to his royal duties with the weight of unprecedented responsibility pressing upon him. The decisions made that night would reverberate through the corridors of power, across the media landscape, and ultimately, into the lives of Harry and Meghan themselves. And while the agreement remained confidential, the palace's inner circle was already aware of the strategic shift. A subtle, almost imperceptible realignment of responsibilities and communications began to take place, signaling that the monarchy was preparing for a new phase, one in which decisive action would be taken to protect the institution from further erosion. The stage was set, and had delivered her ultimatum. Charles had assented, and the machinery of royal governance was quietly mobilizing. But in the world of public perception, timing is everything, and the Sussexes were unaware that a formal review of their titles and privileges was already underway. And that's when the next wave of challenges began. Whispers in the corridors of Parliament, early leaks to the press, and private calls between palace officials and government leaders. The monarchy was moving, and the consequences would ripple outward faster than anyone anticipated. But what came next? The involvement of Parliament, the leaked memos, and the first public stirrings of outrage would push the palace, the royal family, and the Sussexes into uncharted territory. And it all traced back to Anne's decisive stance that night, the moment she refused to remain silent. Why would a private family feud suddenly reach the halls of the UK Parliament? Why would matters that once belonged exclusively behind palace walls now demand the attention of elected officials, legal advisors, and constitutional experts? Because this was no ordinary feud. This was a battle over power, legacy, and public perception, and the Sussexes' actions had made it unavoidable. In the weeks following the Sandringham Pact, reports began to surface that senior palace officials had begun quietly briefing select members of Parliament. Not in press conferences, not in public hearings, but in discreet meetings designed to gauge sentiment, test waters, and ensure that when the formal motion eventually arrived, it would not face insurmountable resistance. Sources suggest that the initial approach was strategic, framed as a constitutional review rather than a punitive measure. The monarchy needed Parliament's involvement because the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, the last time titles were formally revoked, had been archaic, designed for wartime circumstances. Applying it to a contemporary, domestic context required legislative buy-in. Without Parliament's tacit approval, any attempt to strip Harry and Meghan of their remaining privileges could spark a constitutional crisis. Insiders describe a series of private briefings over several weeks. Palace aides reportedly presented detailed reports on the Sussexes' media engagements, philanthropic activities, and commercial endeavors, highlighting how the use of royal titles had amplified global reach. They also cited polling data indicating a sharp decline in domestic approval for Harry and Meghan, framing the intervention as necessary not only to preserve the dignity of the crown, but also to maintain public trust in the monarchy. This approach, according to sources, was methodical. Each briefing outlined the possible ramifications of parliamentary action, legal challenges from the Sussexes' lawyers, media backlash, and international scrutiny. The aim was to prepare Parliament to act decisively, but with a veneer of procedural legitimacy. By presenting the motion as a matter of constitutional duty rather than personal vendetta, palace officials hoped to insulate the crown from accusations of nepotism or pettiness. The stakes were enormous. Stripping the Sussexes of titles would set precedent for how future generations could be treated. Could other royals, especially those stepping back from royal duties, expect similar treatment? Would public perception view this as a long-overdue assertion of discipline or a cruel overreach? These questions haunted the discussions. Meanwhile, within Parliament, reactions were mixed. Some MPs, particularly those with conservative leanings or traditionalist views of the monarchy, reportedly expressed strong support. They saw the Sussexes' behavior as undermining the institution and believed decisive action was necessary. Others, especially younger, progressive members, raised concerns about fairness, equality, and the public optics of targeting individuals for personal grievances. Sources indicate that at one point, a confidential memo reached the Speaker of the House. The memo reportedly summarized palace concerns and outlined a proposed framework for a parliamentary review of the Sussexes' royal privileges. This document was designed to be discreet but thorough, leaving no doubt about the gravity of the situation. What made this intervention unprecedented was the combination of royal authority and legislative process. Traditionally, the Crown operates within constitutional limits, rarely involving Parliament in internal family matters. Yet in this case, the magnitude of the threat, both in terms of public perception and institutional credibility, justified an extraordinary approach. According to insiders, the discussions in Parliament were already becoming tense even before any formal motion. Private lobbying by palace aides emphasized the necessity of protecting the crown. They argued that the monarchy's long-term survival depended on maintaining clear boundaries. Titles are not merely ceremonial. They are instruments of authority, symbols of national heritage, and tools of influence. Allowing them to be exploited could weaken the monarchy in the eyes of the public. Meanwhile, across the pond, Meghan and Harry remained unaware of the full extent of the intervention. Their focus was reportedly on ongoing media engagements, philanthropic endeavors, and potential business deals. They assumed the palace was monitoring but not mobilizing. What they did not anticipate was the scale of the constitutional mechanism quietly being prepared. This situation created a dangerous paradox. The monarchy, seeking to protect its own legitimacy, was now relying on Parliament. The very democratic institution the Crown is supposed to remain politically neutral before to act. The optics, if leaked prematurely, could be devastating. Leaks, of course, were inevitable. Courtiers, MPs, and aides all had their own agendas, and the longer such sensitive information remained contained, the higher the chance of exposure. And indeed, leaks did begin to appear. Initial reports were carefully worded, framed as speculative rumors rather than confirmed facts. But as journalists dug deeper, they discovered credible sources confirming that the monarchy had approached Parliament about reviewing the Sussexes' privileges. For the public, this was shocking. For legal scholars, it was a constitutional anomaly. For Anne and Charles, it was a calculated risk, necessary but fraught with danger. By the end of the preliminary meetings, the palace had achieved partial success. Parliament was taking the matter seriously. Several MPs, initially skeptical, were reportedly convinced of the institutional threat posed by the Sussexes' media and commercial activities. Legal advisors had begun drafting frameworks for how titles could be removed in a modern context, minimizing the chance of legal challenge. And Anne, she remained the quiet architect, watching the machinery move according to plan. But the real challenge was only beginning. Public scrutiny would escalate. Media speculation would intensify. And the Sussexes, now aware of murmurs in Parliament, would respond, not necessarily predictably. The palace faced a delicate balancing act. Move decisively to protect the monarchy, while containing public fallout, managing familial relationships, and navigating a legislative process that could easily spin out of control. And then, sources claim, a phone call changed everything. It was reportedly from the king himself to the Speaker of the House, a discreet, carefully worded conversation in which Charles framed the issue as a constitutional and public interest concern rather than a personal grievance. Even in this private context, the stakes were enormous. Any misstep could provoke accusations of royal overreach or constitutional impropriety. The call allegedly laid the groundwork for the first formal motion, quietly drafted behind closed doors. And once Parliament was engaged, the process began to accelerate faster than anyone inside the palace anticipated. What had started as a private meeting between Anne and Charles was now transforming into a legislative event with implications not only for Harry and Meghan, but for the future of the monarchy itself. The clock was ticking, and the Sussexes remained unaware of the precise scale of the operation unfolding around them. Because once Parliament got involved, there was no turning back. And then the first memo leaked. When a monarch starts lobbying politicians, history starts repeating itself. But no one expected it to happen quite like this. The phone call from King Charles to the Speaker of the House was brief, measured, and carefully rehearsed. Yet its implications were seismic. According to insiders, Charles framed the conversation around institutional integrity rather than personal grievance. He spoke not as a father confronting a rebellious son, but as a monarch confronting a systemic threat to the crown itself. The Sussexes' use of royal titles, he argued, risked diminishing public trust and eroding centuries of tradition. The Speaker, who normally remains an impartial guardian of parliamentary procedure, was caught in an unprecedented position. How does one respond when a reigning monarch suggests that Parliament intervene in what has, historically, been considered the private domain of the royal family? There was no precedent in modern history. Certainly nothing in the last century approached this level of direct involvement. According to political sources, the Speaker spent the next several days consulting with legal advisors, constitutional experts, and senior MPs to understand the gravity of Charles's suggestion. On one hand, he recognized the need to protect the institution from external exploitation and the growing public perception of royal dysfunction. On the other, he understood that any appearance of parliamentary collusion with the monarchy could ignite a scandal of enormous proportions. Meanwhile, news of the conversation leaked, not officially, but through careful channels monitored by palace aides. The media began to speculate. Was Charles trying to bypass standard protocols? Was Parliament about to overstep its bounds by stripping a royal of their inherited titles? The speculation itself began to stir public anxiety, fueling debates about monarchy, democracy, and accountability. Inside Parliament, divisions emerged quickly. Some MPs, particularly traditionalists, saw this as a necessary step to preserve the dignity of the crown. Others, particularly younger, progressive members, viewed it as dangerous precedent. An encroachment of royal influence into a democratic body meant to remain independent. Heated conversations reportedly erupted in back rooms and private committees, with aides shuttling between offices to assess loyalty and gauge support. The Speaker's dilemma deepened when it became clear that the Sussexes were actively monitoring the political landscape. Their legal teams, media advisors and publicists were prepared to respond immediately to any hint of parliamentary action. A premature leak could spark lawsuits, international backlash, and irreparable damage to public confidence in the monarchy. Every move required precision. Every word mattered. At the same time, palace officials maintained constant communication with Charles, advising him on language, tone, and strategy. The king reportedly emphasized that the request must not appear punitive. It was about safeguarding the institution, protecting the public trust, and ensuring that royal privileges were not used for personal gain. Yet, even with careful phrasing, the act of involving Parliament had already created a constitutional anomaly. Complicating matters further, legal advisors highlighted the delicate issue of the Sussex's children. Archie and Lilibet, while not currently active royals, had claims to titles and privileges by birth. Any parliamentary motion could theoretically extend to them, creating a legal and ethical quandary. The Speaker had to weigh the risk of infringing upon the rights of minors against the Crown's need for decisive action. Reports suggest that behind closed doors, the Speaker sought counsel from multiple constitutional law experts. They analyzed historical precedents, including Edward VIII's abdication and the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917. While neither fully mirrored the current scenario, elements of both offered guidance on how to proceed. Legal opinions were mixed, some emphasizing the necessity of transparency, others cautioning against legislative overreach. Meanwhile, the palace was quietly assembling supporting documentation to strengthen their position. Detailed records of the Sussex's public engagements, media appearances, and commercial activities were compiled. Polling data illustrating declining public trust was included. Analysts framed the matter not as a personal vendetta, but as a question of institutional integrity, emphasizing that the monarchy must remain beyond reproach. The Speaker reportedly found himself under extraordinary pressure. On one side, the monarch's intervention was unmistakable, a rare and weighty request. On the other, public scrutiny and parliamentary independence demanded caution. Missteps could provoke constitutional crises, legal challenges, or a full-scale media scandal. For weeks, he delayed making a decision, convening private discussions with senior MPs and legal advisors to explore options and anticipate fallout. Then came the first internal leak, a memo summarizing the palace's concerns and suggested parliamentary review. Though classified, its existence was whispered in political circles and eventually reached select media outlets. This leak triggered immediate speculation, creating a sense of urgency that forced Parliament's hand. The Speaker now had to navigate not only legal and constitutional challenges, but also a rapidly evolving public narrative. Within the palace, Charles remained in close communication, and, who had long been the architect of the strategic push against the Sussexes, reportedly monitored developments with precision. Charles, conscious of his personal and institutional obligations, provided measured guidance, emphasizing the importance of discretion and procedural integrity. Both understood that timing was critical. Any premature announcement could undermine the legitimacy of the action and provoke a backlash that might be impossible to contain. The stakes were further heightened by the Sussexes' unpredictable response. Sources indicate that Harry and Meghan were beginning to sense that something significant was unfolding, though they lacked specifics. Their legal teams were alert, ready to counter any formal parliamentary motion. Media consultants were preparing messaging strategies to control the narrative if information leaked. In short, the palace was navigating a highly combustible environment, with multiple actors capable of influencing public perception. The Speaker's ultimate dilemma crystallized. Approve discreet parliamentary engagement, risking the appearance of collusion with the monarchy, or delay, potentially allowing the Sussexes to exploit the window for public relations advantage. Every choice carried profound consequences for the Crown, for Parliament, and for the public's trust. Sources claim that the Speaker ultimately chose a middle path, allowing a controlled review process to begin while maintaining plausible deniability. Confidential meetings with key MPs were convened, legal frameworks were examined, and palace documentation was circulated under strict security protocols. The goal was clear: prepare the legislative ground for potential action without triggering immediate public backlash or legal challenge. And yet, Even with these precautions, the risk of exposure remained high. The palace was dealing not only with the intricacies of law and politics, but also with human nature. Aides, officials, and MPs all had their own ambitions and allegiances. One misstep, one rumor, one leaked document, and the carefully laid plan could collapse in hours. By the end of this phase, it was clear Parliament had entered uncharted territory. The Speaker, who normally functions as a neutral arbiter, had been thrust into the center of a delicate constitutional crisis. Charles had succeeded in elevating a private family issue into a matter of public and legislative concern. And Anne, the quiet strategist, had ensured that the monarchy was acting preemptively rather than reactively. But the most dangerous element of all was yet to come, the leaked memo. Once the existence of the internal document became known to journalists, the media storm was inevitable. Headlines, speculation, and opinion pieces would dominate for days. Social media chatter would spread rapidly, amplifying every whisper. The palace's discretion would be tested like never before. And in the midst of this growing storm, Harry and Meghan remained largely unaware of the full scope of what was unfolding. They knew the monarchy was upset, they sensed the political maneuvering, but the precise mechanism, the involvement of Parliament, the confidential briefings, and the first draft of a formal motion had not yet reached them. The Speaker's dilemma was only the beginning. Once the memo leaked publicly, the palace, Parliament, and the Sussexes would all have to respond simultaneously, a convergence that threatened to ignite the most explosive royal confrontation in decades. And that confrontation was fast approaching. 1 page, 3 signatures, and an explosive clause no one saw coming. The memo landed quietly in Parliament, addressed to select MPs and senior aides. Initially, it was treated as routine, an internal briefing, confidential, procedural. But within hours, the gravity became unmistakable. The document outlined a formal framework for reviewing and potentially revoking the Sussexes' remaining royal titles and privileges. What made it unprecedented wasn't the suggestion itself, it was the audacity of how far it went. The first 2 paragraphs were measured, almost bureaucratic, detailing the historical context. It referenced the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, the role of the monarchy in granting peerages, and the legal mechanism for Parliament to intervene when a royal's behavior risks institutional integrity. To any casual observer, it looked like careful procedural language. But then came paragraph 3, the explosive clause, a potential retroactive reclassification of status that could impact Harry and Meghan's children. Yes, Archie and Lilibet. The palace had long sought to protect the children from the fallout of adult decisions. But Anne's insistence, backed by Charles, was clear. The monarchy could not risk public perception of inequity or favoritism. If titles could be leveraged as public influence, then the next generation's privileges needed scrutiny. The clause implied that even unborn or minor heirs could see their status adjusted if it conflicted with the crown's integrity. The leak of this memo to the press, initially through unnamed parliamentary sources, ignited immediate speculation. Headlines screamed, "Parliament to strip royal children of privilege, and the crown moves against the Sussexes." Social media erupted, with half the public defending the monarchy's right to act, and the other half accusing it of draconian overreach. Within Buckingham Palace, the reaction was carefully controlled. Aides emphasized discretion, insisting that nothing had been finalized and that the memo was part of an exploratory review. But the narrative was already beyond their control. Journalists, analysts, and opposition MPs began dissecting every line. Legal experts debated the constitutionality of the proposed action, citing centuries of precedent while acknowledging the novelty of applying it to a modern context. And, always the strategist, reportedly anticipated the leak. She had quietly ensured that the document's content would provoke discussion without appearing as a malicious attack. Her goal was not to shame Harry or Meghan, but to create pressure, to make it clear that the crown could no longer tolerate ambiguity. Every sentence was designed to force attention, to make Parliament act, and to demonstrate that the monarchy would assert its authority when necessary. Charles, meanwhile, faced an extraordinary balancing act. He needed the memo to achieve its purpose, spurring parliamentary review, but without fueling a media narrative of familial vindictiveness. He reportedly reviewed drafts multiple times, adjusting language to appear impartial, measured, and duty-bound. One aide commented, "He knew that perception was everything. The king could not appear as a vengeful father. He had to appear as a guardian of the institution. But perception is fragile." As the memo circulated, social media users speculated wildly about its implications. Some suggested that Harry and Meghan's titles would be stripped immediately. Others feared for the future of their children. Conspiracy theories proliferated, claiming the palace sought to rewrite succession rules entirely. Palace communications teams scrambled to issue clarifications without confirming or denying any part of the memo, a nearly impossible task given the speed of digital dissemination. Within Parliament, the memo set off a flurry of activity. Committee chairs convened emergency briefings. Legal advisors prepared risk assessments. MPs debated the scope of their authority and the potential consequences for both the monarchy and the public. One insider described the atmosphere as tense, almost electric. Everyone knew something historic was unfolding, but no one fully understood the full impact. The memo also had immediate repercussions for the Sussexes themselves. Sources indicate that Harry and Meghan were informed indirectly through leaks and media coverage. Their response was reportedly swift and strategic. Private legal consultations, internal communications teams mobilized, and careful messaging designed to control the narrative before Parliament could act decisively. Interestingly, the memo exposed a paradox. While the monarchy sought to protect itself, the act of leaking, intentional or accidental, amplified public scrutiny and put additional pressure on all parties. It forced debates on constitutional norms, family loyalty, and the balance between personal rights and institutional authority. And, true to form, remained outwardly calm. While the media frenzy erupted, she continued her public duties, attending military ceremonies and opening hospitals, all with the appearance of normalcy. Insiders describe her as smiling with quiet satisfaction, aware that the memo's leak, while chaotic, served the strategic purpose she intended, to force action without appearing petty. For Charles, the stakes were higher than ever. The king now faced not only the procedural challenge of ensuring parliamentary review, but also the personal challenge of navigating familial relations under intense global scrutiny. Every decision risked being interpreted as favoritism, cruelty, or indecisiveness. And the leaked memo made it clear that inaction was no longer an option. Public opinion became a secondary battlefield. Citizens, pundits, and royal commentators dissected the memo, offering opinions on whether the crown had overstepped, whether Harry and Meghan had forfeited their privileges, and whether Archie and Lilibet should be implicated. Social media campaigns emerged, ranging from fervent support for the monarchy's decisiveness to outraged defenses of the Sussexes' rights. Amid this chaos, palace insiders continued behind-the-scenes coordination with Parliament. Private briefings aimed to clarify intentions, explain legal frameworks, and outline possible consequences, and reportedly monitored these developments with meticulous attention, ensuring that every step aligned with her initial strategy: protect the crown, assert authority, and minimize public scandal. Yet, even with careful planning, the leaked memo had introduced a new variable: public momentum. Citizens were now watching. Global media outlets covered every development. Every statement from palace officials, every whispered parliamentary debate, every minor leak was magnified, dissected, and debated. The monarchy had to act, but they also had to manage perception with unprecedented precision. And at the heart of it all, the Sussexes were responding. Legal teams drafted potential challenges. PR strategists prepared media interventions. Harry and Meghan were no longer passive players. They had been drawn into a high-stakes constitutional drama they could not ignore. The leaked memo had changed everything. It transformed a private family decision into a public, legal, and political crisis. It forced Parliament to act. It forced the media to amplify every rumor. It forced the monarchy to navigate a labyrinth of law, precedent, and optics. And, most importantly, it forced the Sussexes into a corner they could not easily escape. But just as the storm began to swirl, one unexpected player entered the scene: Princess and herself. in an unscripted move that would shock the palace and the world alike. She went on record with a statement that hinted at the seriousness of the situation without revealing full details. Her words, carefully chosen and measured, sent shockwaves. She suggested that silence was no longer an option, that discretion had limits, and that the institution must act when threatened. The media instantly interpreted it as confirmation that Parliament would act to strip titles, not just for Harry and Meghan, but potentially for the next generation as well. And that's when the palace realized the memo had done more than it intended. It had forced every stakeholder, Parliament, the public, the media, and the Sussexes, to confront the reality that royal privilege was no longer untouchable. But even as the initial shockwave settled, another crisis loomed on the horizon. The Sussexes' own strategy, which was quietly building in response to the leaked memo, would soon collide head-on with the monarchy's plan. And that collision would push the drama from strategic maneuvering into a full-blown confrontation that no one inside the palace or Parliament could ignore. She broke with protocol, and maybe the palace, in just 43 words. It was a crisp morning in Scotland, at a military ceremony few anticipated would become historic. Cameras were rolling. Reporters leaned forward, expecting the usual royal pleasantries, smiles, handshakes, brief remarks about duty and service. But Princess Anne had something different in mind. When asked about recent strains in the family, she paused. A slight tilt of her head, a measured breath, and then she said it. There comes a time when silence is mistaken for weakness. I don't believe in either. A seemingly simple statement, yet it sent shockwaves. Within seconds, social media exploded. Journalists scrambled to interpret the meaning. Political commentators analyzed tone and body language. Royal watchers dissected her history of discretion, noting that Anne had rarely, if ever, made such pointed public remarks. What made the statement so extraordinary wasn't just the content. It was the context. Anne had just returned from a series of confidential meetings with Charles, advisors, and Parliament. She knew full well the memo had leaked, the Sussexes were aware, and the public was beginning to speculate about potential legislative action. Her words, though measured, served as an unmistakable signal. The monarchy was prepared to act, and Anne was spearheading the initiative. Insiders claim that Anne's delivery was intentional. The phrasing, "silence is mistaken for weakness," was designed to communicate dual messages. To the public, it emphasized that the crown would no longer tolerate ambiguity. To Harry and Meghan, it was a quiet but unmistakable warning. The era of leniency was over. The reaction in the media was instantaneous. Newspapers ran headlines questioning the monarchy's internal dynamics. Princess Anne breaks silence on royal rift, and the royal enforcer speaks. No more silence. Social media memes proliferated, blending her poised image with hashtags like #RoyalTruth and #NoMoreSilence. Analysts debated whether her statement represented personal sentiment, institutional strategy, or a combination of both. Yet the palace maintained silence on the specifics. No official press release clarified her remarks. This ambiguity only amplified speculation. It was a masterclass in subtle signaling. Convey authority without explicit detail, create public intrigue, and maintain strategic control over timing. Anne's intervention also had a ripple effect on Parliament. MPs who had been cautiously considering their role in the title review suddenly felt renewed urgency. The unscripted comment suggested that the monarchy itself was publicly signaling the seriousness of the situation. While Charles remained in the background, Anne's words functioned as both shield and spear. They protected the crown's position while piercing the veil of secrecy surrounding the Sussexes' privileges. Within the palace, reactions were mixed. Some aides praised Anne's decisiveness, noting that her clarity cut through ambiguity and forced action. Others feared the statement might accelerate public scrutiny too quickly, potentially complicating parliamentary deliberations. Charles himself reportedly expressed cautious approval, recognizing that Anne's timing was impeccable. She had communicated urgency without crossing into open confrontation. For the Sussexes, however, the effect was destabilizing. Sources indicate that Meghan's legal and PR teams were immediately alerted to the interview. Within hours, private communications and strategy meetings were convened. The couple realized that Anne's comment was not just rhetorical. It was a strategic escalation designed to solidify the palace's position and force parliamentary involvement. This unscripted statement also shifted public perception. Polls conducted within days suggested a slight uptick in approval for decisive royal action, particularly among older demographics and those with strong attachment to traditional monarchy. Younger audiences and international observers, however, were more critical, framing the remark as authoritarian or punitive. The resulting polarization added another layer of complexity for the palace, emphasizing that every public word carried weight in a globalized, digitally connected media environment. Beyond immediate media and political implications, Anne's comment served a personal function. It reinforced her image as the monarchy's guardian. Unlike other family members who occasionally make public statements, Anne's reputation for discipline and consistency lent credibility to her words. She was no celebrity royal making headlines for drama. She was a strategic operator signaling intent with precision. The ripple effect extended internally as well. Courtiers and palace staff, many of whom had previously been uncertain about the next steps, reportedly felt renewed clarity after the interview. Tasks were reprioritized, legal teams mobilized, and communications protocols adjusted to ensure that subsequent leaks or media speculation could be managed effectively. Even as the statement circulated globally, however, the palace remained acutely aware of the risks. A comment like Anne's could provoke resistance from the Sussexes, generate legal challenges, and invite unprecedented media scrutiny. Sources indicate that senior aides continuously monitored social media, press coverage, and international news to assess emerging narratives, adjusting strategy in real time. Anne's words also catalyzed conversations within Parliament. MPs who had been hesitating over legal frameworks and procedural questions reportedly saw the comment as a call to action. Private briefings intensified, and discussions about drafting formal motions or frameworks for revoking titles accelerated. The unscripted remark, while brief, acted as a trigger for legislative momentum, aligning public perception with internal strategy. In essence, and had transformed a single, carefully worded sentence into a multi-purpose strategic tool. Signaling resolve, directing public discourse, shaping media narratives, and indirectly influencing parliamentary activity. It was subtle, yet profound. But the palace was about to realize that even this level of precision could not contain the Sussexes' response. As whispers of the memo, the parliamentary briefings, and Anne's remarks reached Harry and Meghan's inner circle, their own countermoves began to crystallize. Leaks, legal threats, and media campaigns were prepared, each designed to preempt or counteract the palace's strategy. And that's when the real chess game began, a high-stakes battle of influence, media, law, and public perception that would escalate beyond anything previously seen in modern royal history. Anne's words had set the stage, but the players were now fully engaged. The next move, insiders say, would involve not just the monarchy and parliament, but the Sussexes themselves. A collision course with consequences none of the participants could fully predict. While the palace leaked memos and quietly nudged parliament, the Sussexes were not sitting idle. Far from it. Behind the California gates of Montecito, a carefully orchestrated counteroffensive was taking shape, a strategy that combined legal firepower, media influence, and the subtle art of perception management. Harry and Meghan had learned, over the years, that the monarchy is as much a public relations machine as it is a hereditary institution. Every move they made abroad was scrutinized. Every interview, podcast, or appearance became fodder for headlines, memes, and think pieces. And now, with Anne's unscripted interview echoing across the globe and the leaked memo signaling potential title revocation, the stakes had escalated dramatically. Sources claimed that Meghan immediately convened her core advisors, lawyers specializing in constitutional and international law, public relations strategists, and crisis communication experts. Their first task, understand the memo's legal implications. Could Parliament actually strip titles? Was there precedent to protect her and Harry? What risks did such action pose to Archie and Lilibet? Every question had to be answered, every angle assessed. Simultaneously, Harry reportedly focused on narrative control. He engaged close media contacts to begin shaping the story in outlets sympathetic to their perspective. The goal was twofold. First, to ensure the Sussexes' perspective was presented fairly. Second, to preemptively neutralize the palace's messaging. By framing the potential revocation as a punitive, politically motivated act, they could mobilize public support and generate pressure on Parliament to tread carefully. This counter-strategy had already been rehearsed during prior media campaigns, but now the stakes were exponentially higher. The memo leak and public remarks and the increasing parliamentary attention created a perfect storm. Every tweet, article, and podcast episode had to be calibrated. Too aggressive, and they risked alienating public sentiment. Too passive, and the palace narrative would dominate. According to sources, Meghan's team also began reviewing every public engagement she had participated in since the Oprah interview. They were combing for potential legal vulnerabilities, media misstatements, or claims that could be challenged by the palace. The goal: create a fortified narrative that would withstand scrutiny if a legal challenge or parliamentary debate were to occur. Harry, for his part, was reportedly focused on maintaining morale and preparing for potential public attacks. Privately, he was said to be frustrated, not only by the palace's strategy, but also by the sense of inevitability that seemed to hang over the process. The Sussexes had believed, at least until recently, that their distance from royal duties had created a buffer from direct intervention. That illusion had just been shattered. One insider described the Sussexes' mood as a combination of shock and determination. Shock at the speed and breadth of the palace's maneuvers. Determination to retain control over their own story. The leaked memo had forced them out of passivity and into action. Their legal teams, media consultants, and international contacts were now operating on high alert. Every move, every message, every interview was scrutinized before release. The Sussexes were also reported to be exploring diplomatic channels, leveraging contacts in the U.S. and beyond to apply